out that my pain conditions were quite different to that of my colleagues, to the point where I was being paid and treated quite differently to people at the same level doing the same job as me. And I found out kind of by accident.
Meggie Palmer was one of Australia's best and brightest TV journalists, travelling the globe, interviewing everyone from Hollywood movie stars to the most powerful politicians on the planet. That is, until she discovers she's being treated and paid differently to her male peers. So she sets off on a path away from traditional media towards technology so she can close the gender pay gap. Meggie Palmer is my guest on Curveball. From Dead Set Studios, this is Curveball, the show where we dig in deep and we get the nitty-gritty details from the world's top business leaders on how to thrive when times are tough. Meggie Palmer is the founder of Pep Talk Her, a company on a mission to close the gender pay gap by empowering women to get even in the workplace. Now, this encompasses everything from encouraging women to track their daily wins to Meggie personally coaching clients to six-figure raises. Let's hope she does that to me. Meggie, welcome to Curveball.
Such a treat to be here. We can talk about how much you pay yourself later, Kelly.
Yeah, that's right, which will be not enough, and you can tell me that I have to rectify that. So you were a journalist for about 15 years before starting Pep Talk Her. What kind of work were you doing initially?
So I became a journalist by accident, actually. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so, you know, when you're choosing, I think I was like 16 or 17, and I was like looking through that form of universities, and it was kind of like, you know, putting your finger in the air and going, like, I don't know, let's choose one of these ones. And I was like, well, I'm good at English, may as well tack some journalism onto my business degree. And kind of went from there and actually ended up kind of loving it. And it's funny, Kelly, because I grew up without a television. So I grew up on a farm. Mum and dad got rid of the TV. They thought it would be great for us to, you know, have family conversations every night and all this kind of stuff. So we didn't have any TV, which is very awkward when you're trying to be a cool 13-year-old and you don't know what happened in 90210. But anyway, all the Simpsons, even now people make jokes about the Simpsons and I'm like, got no idea what you're talking about. Did not have a television. But my mum always jokes with me. She's like, yeah, we deprived you of TV, so you ended up becoming a television journalist just to kind of get your fill of TV eventually. But it was by accident, honestly. I was dating this guy randomly at university, really nice guy, and he was like, oh, yeah, I'm doing work experience. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, I'm doing work experience and, you know, at this television station. And I was like, are you? He's like, yeah. And in my head, a testament to the confidence that I have in myself, Kelly, I was like, but I'm better than you at university. If you can get work experience, I should be getting work experience. Why didn't I think of this? So then I marched into a lecture and said, I would like some work experience. I didn't even really know what it was, honestly. And they were like, yeah, we could help you arrange that. And so they did. And so I got experience as a TV, you know, junior burger reporter and kind of went from there. But it was just like, you know, news stories and court stories, police reporting, a lot of cat up the tree type stories. My friends still give me grief about the time that Channel 10 made me cover the story of an 8-year-old who got a hole-in-one at the Indooroopilly golf course. So lots of breaking news there, Kelly, lots of breaking news.
And it's a very long way from that story all the way to some of the bigger names that you ended up interviewing in the bigger shows you worked on.
Yeah. And, you know, I think, you know, like everyone, right, you start where you start. And I used to roll the auto cue at Channel 10 in Brisbane, like in the studio with Brad McEwen and Georgie Lewis and Bill McDonald, and who all went on to become good friends, which was lucky because sometimes when you're rolling auto cue, you stuff it up and you really make them look bad if you stuff it up. So it was very like from the grassroots up, kind of figuring it all out and learning the ropes of a newsroom. And then, yeah, so I was at Channel 10 in Brisbane for a while, started initially up in Cairns in far north Queensland, working with some great journalists, Michael Best, Kath Turner, Talitha Cummins, people who are still friends to this day. And then Channel 10 sent me to Canberra and I worked down there as a political reporter with under Paul Bongiorno in the press gallery, which I loved. and then moved to London for the BBC over there, and freelanced, got a job at the Beeb, did a heap of work, and then eventually ended up back in Australia. And some of my most favourite times in my entire career when I was at SBS, working for SBS Dateline. Love everything that SBS stands for. I learnt so much there, so much. It totally changed my life working there for the better. Luke Waters, a great journalist, and I went to Syria, where we interviewed Bashar al-Assad in his palace in Damascus there a couple of years ago. But I walked away from that entire experience like really feeling for the people of Syria, the people that Luke and I had the privilege to meet while we were there briefly. Even I remember we were only there for a couple of days, and after dinner one night, or maybe it was during the day, I can't remember, I went to a little market to buy a gift for the people at work, and they make these beautiful silver, very intricate sort of silver jewelry boxes and earrings and things like that. So we're in this market, which was empty because there's not really many people in Damascus these days. And I was talking to the seller, and he's like, it's so hard to run a business here because no payment providers will let you get money out of Syria. So these small businesses couldn't even, with the few locals who did want to support their businesses, or the few people who could get in, it was just a very bizarre experience overall. But I really want to go back there. I'm really excited to go back to Syria one day.
It's so devastating what's happened in that country, and so it'll be really interesting when you do go back what the landscape looks like, how the economy has recovered or not. That, of course, is all a very long way from interviewing Brad Pitt.
Well, I went to when I was a freelancer in London before I went to the BBC, I worked for Channel 7, and there was some movie. It was obviously a terrible movie. I can't even remember, but it was like Brad Pitt and Will Ferrell. And so I took my cousin as my audio person. Lucky Meg, she got to come with me. We both share a name, Meg and Meg. And she was on exchange at the time. So she came with me to the red carpet in our, coats. It was snowing. It was freezing. We had the beret, very unfashionable, and it was really interesting. Brad Pitt that was cool. But I remember Will Ferrell had an incredible memory because I hadn't met him, but I was at a press conference the day before with him. And then the next day interviewed him briefly on the red carpet. He's like, I remember you. You were at the back right of the press conference. I was like, dude, there was 70 people. How would you have remembered one person? But he's obviously got an amazing photographic memory or something similar. But that's, that's the thing about journalism, right? It never really, and I don't know if you feel this too, Kellie, it didn't feel like work for me. Of course it was work, but it's such a privilege to meet fascinating people. And it doesn't, honestly, the most interesting stories to me were the people that, not the names that you'd know, right, but the people who advocate for grassroots change in their local community, or who, we did one story when I was at SBS Insight, this family, they had a son called Boyd, and Boyd lives with some really challenging disabilities, and they shared their story with us of relinquishing care of their child to the state, because as a family, that's what they had to do at that point. And, to share that story with me, a stranger really, and then to broadcast that to millions of people, it's a real privilege to have that insight into people's lives. And you're there at the highest of highs, at the Olympics and the house auctions and those things, but then also the lowest of lows, like the earthquakes, like the disasters, like the court stories. And people are very generous, I think, to share their stories with us journalists.
Your career has been outstanding, but of course there's this little blip. It came kind of crashing to a halt about a decade ago. Can you share with us what happened?
Yeah, I had an experience. I had an experience that I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate to, where basically I found out that my pain conditions were quite different to that of my colleagues, to the point where I was being paid and treated quite differently to people at the same level doing the same job as me. And I found out kind of by accident. And, I was kind of raised to think that the world was an equal place and that women could do anything. And I was a child of, the 80s, and that was very much my primary school was yes, you can be whatever you want to be. You can do anything. It's a great world for you all. So I really believed the hype. Honestly, I drank the Kool-Aid. And so when I found out, I was like, oh, it's just a mistake. I'll better let them know because they'll fix it. And so I raised it at the company that I was working at the time. And I thought that when they realized there was an inequity, it would be like, oh my goodness, whoops, we'll fix it, don't stress. But the response instead was, if you don't like it, you can quit or you can take us to court. And I was like, I beg your pardon? What? And they're like, yeah, like basically, F you. Like just pretty much like, yeah, well, like, we knew this all along and like, what's your problem? And I was like, well, my problem is it's not fair. And they're like, that's not our problem. That's on you. So deal with it basically. So, and, it's interesting. Again, to get to where I was in my career and the age that I was at that point, to only then realize that the world was an unequal place is in and of itself a bit of a privilege, and I appreciate that there's so many people listening and so many people in the world today who experience that at childhood. And I just never had that, which is a blessing. But when I did experience inequality, because I was a woman experiencing the gender pay gap in real life, I found it quite a shock, honestly.
And of course, this is before, there's been a little bit of a reckoning around this stuff in the last 12 to 18 months. There was a big review of BBC salaries at one point. Mm-hmm. I know that led to, a couple of ABC television presenters who went in and said, I'm not paid as much as my co-host. And, in a place where you think everything's pretty equal. Mm-hmm. But back then, and you're a relatively young reporter at the time, how difficult was it for you to find a voice? And then what did you do once you got that response?
It's a first world problem. I was relatively well paid. I just wasn't as well paid. I just want to put caveats around it. But do you know what's really interesting is that it was incredibly stressful. And again, it's a first world problem, but it was I thought it was pretty normal to bring it up, but I started to get a lot of pushback. And I suspect that's because deep down the people I was speaking to knew that it was wrong and knew that this is potentially a problem, but they kind of thought I'd just go away and then I just shut up and just cop it. And I struggle sometimes to make decisions, Kellie. And so I emailed sort of my brain's trust, a bunch of my sponsors and my mentors and friends and people that I love. And I said to them, what should I do? Because I was like, this is bullshit. I'm going to what? And they were like, if you take this on, you'll never work in media again. And I was like, what is happening? What is happening? And, most people said, don't do anything. You will never work again. You should be lucky. You've got a great job. Just cop it. Just cop it. Don't even worry. It's not even a thing.
Right. Which is kind of a valid's the wrong word, but it's that could happen. You could be blacklisted. We know people who have.
Yeah, and their advice was from a place of love. They were trying to protect me. Of course, they were like, "Don't rock the boat. Pick your battles. This is the wrong battle to pick." And I just kind of felt for me, inequality is from back when I was a child, and 4 or 5 year old. And if I got in trouble, but my brother had really done it, that just really rubbed me the wrong way as a child. So it's kind of a deep seated frustration at inequality. I just hate it. Of course, I hate it when it happens to other people. And I suppose when it happens to yourself, when you experience it yourself, it also cuts deep. And so I was I felt very compelled that I had to take it on. And I was like, oh, let's be friends. Let's just talk about it. And they're like, no, you've heard our response, quit or take us to court. And I was like, are you serious? So I tried to get a mediator because I was trying to be really friendly and all yay, we're friends, we'll figure it out. And that just was stonewalled as well. And so I ended up having to get a lawyer. And, I went to the best lawyer in town. He told me his prices. I freaked out because I was young and didn't have a lot of money, and I didn't know what I didn't know, Kellie. And if I had my time again, I think it was $6,000 or $7,000, which is nothing. Maybe it was it was not a lot of money, but I was I could.
It's a lot for a young reporter.
I was mortified. I was absolutely not. So I got my friend's brother to do it, who's a lovely human, but is not the best media lawyer in town. So of course it was approached very differently. And so, anyway, the whole experience was very stressful. But, I guess the good thing that I think has come out of it is that I experienced that and I lived through that experience, which some of your listeners may have had legal battles in the past, or they may have had inequities in the workplace. And it kind of taught me a lot of mistakes. You should get the best lawyer. If there's a clear contractual issue and it's pretty black and white, you should definitely do that. You should definitely put everything in writing. Every time you have a meeting, you should respond in an email. So it's date stamped and in writing. So if people want to dispute it, that's the time to dispute it, not down the track. So things like this, which was, again, it's not rocket science, but I just didn't know. And so what happened was, after that whole experience, I was then able to help so many other friends. I had a friend who was sacked while pregnant. I had lots of friends who've since been underpaid. I've had friends who 6-7 years, no pay rises, not for inflation, nothing. And so this experience taught me a lot about how I could help other people. And I started to realize, again, like this gender pay gap situation happened to me. Who else has it happened to? And of course, then I did the research and realized, Kellie, that this is a problem around the world. The gap sits at approximately 20% for most developed countries, which is not great. But it's especially not great when it comes to retirement, because if you think about superannuation or 401k retirement funds, they're also much more than 20% less, because they also haven't had that compounding effect, right? So it literally is like, it's a huge issue that I'm now, it's basically that shitty experience has kind of put me on this path to, where I am today, living in New York, running a company that, works with some of the biggest Fortune 200 companies in the world.
But this would have been incredibly tough in the moment. And I think back, I've had one issue around this where at the ABC, again, a place where you think it's going to be all nice and wonderful.
Yeah.
I got pregnant. I was in a management job and I had my 12 months off with my baby. And then when I tried to return to work, I was told I wasn't allowed to job share in the position I had because, it was a management position. And so they had to move me kind of sideways. And so moving me sideways, they also demoted me from several points, which kind of equated to kind of 18 grand off my salary. And I kept saying, how can this be possible? Like, how is it that this can go on? And perhaps we should go to Fair Work and all of those things. But everyone just kept telling me I was too emotional, they could do it, and I was like, even if you can do it legally, should you? Like, so how did you not get cranky? Because I think if I reflect back on that time now, and you're so vulnerable as a young mum trying to get back into the workforce.
My goodness, of course.
How did you not get so angry that you kind of lost your way in navigating this?
I became quite anxious, actually, and I couldn't really leave the apartment for several days on end. It was that wasn't nice. And I did get angry, I guess, as I got over the sadness, I became angry. But my mum was just like, you just have to she was the one, she's like, you just have to breathe it out. She's like, and you just have to bless those people and just kind of be like, what a difficult position to be in, that's how you feel the need to treat someone else. Like that's kind of sad and how shameful for them. So I started treating them with pity, to be like, oh, imagine if that was your job, to treat people like that. That's kind of tragic for you that's your life. So that's
it's a good spin. It's a good kind of reframe on the situation. I like that.
Yeah.
What were the blokes that were working in the same place thinking about all of this and watching this unfold? What was their response?
They were the ones in charge, right? So, I mean, and I don't necessarily think the inequality that happened, I don't think that was malicious at the time necessarily. I think it just happened. They got away with it. You don't know what you don't know in terms of what others are paid and what others' conditions and contracts say. So, I guess that's another lesson, isn't it, to all of us, to ask questions, to talk openly and honestly as much as you can with your friends and colleagues who you trust about these things, so that you can learn and so that you can start to re-benchmark yourself based on what others are negotiating as well. I didn't know that.
What about the male colleagues around you? You kind of equals who are getting paid more than you once they realise that. Any conversation going on about that?
I think it became very much every man and woman for themselves, and I think people think I'm responsible for my outcomes and for my paying conditions, so I don't have time and I shouldn't have to bother to think about anyone else. And on the one hand, I understand that. But on the other hand, I think, there's, of course, that quote of like, bad things happen when good people do and say nothing, right? And so I felt quite compelled to, it wasn't really about the money for me. It was just more of, honestly, it was more of a line in the sand to say, you can't do this to other people. I had savings. I was pretty confident. I knew I could always get work. I didn't believe the hype, you'll never work in media. I was like, whatever, mate. I just didn't buy that. But I was like, what if I was pregnant? Or what if I had a couple of kids? Or what if I had a mortgage? I couldn't just risk everything and have these hard conversations knowing that, of course, I was going to be marginalized. So I felt quite compelled to say something, so that my hope was that maybe they would think twice in future. Maybe that was naive, Kellie, but that's the story that I told myself anyway.
So you start hearing quite horrendous stories from friends and family, people close to you sharing their stories that are not unlike yours. And then you must have thought, hang on a minute, can this be a business? Like, how did you make the leap from concerned friend and kind of advocate for your mates after everything that you went through to, you know, maybe I've got this entrepreneurial streak and I can turn this into something?
I guess I never really even thought of it as a business. I just thought of it, I certainly thought of it as a community. You know, I had that experience and I was like, this is something that needs to be paid forward to other people. I need to teach everyone all the mistakes I made so no one else makes them again. So I kind of just started helping friends of friends, and then people would text me and call me and ask for it. It just would kind of snowball. And then I was like, I should probably centralize this. So I taught myself to build WordPress websites on YouTube, which was probably not the best use of my time, but that was, you know, tinkering away till 2 a.m. on these awful WordPress. I hate WordPress. We use Squarespace now.
Like every good entrepreneur, you're just hacking it up in the lounge room.
Figuring it out. It was terrible. I wish I could show you that first website. It was shocking. I was like, I guess I should capture people's emails. I guess we should create content and start to email people, and obviously had no idea what I was doing. So I enrolled in an accelerator actually, and started doing this accelerator after hours, after work, because I'd started researching stories about Australians running startups in San Francisco. I'd started doing this research and I was like, oh, these people kind of weren't coders and they weren't business people, but they were starting businesses and they were actually going quite well. And I was like, I didn't even know you could do that. I was like, oh, that's a thing. Oh, that's interesting. And I guess it kind of planted some seeds. And so I started thinking about things through a technology lens. And I guess I became a journalist because I really, and I still believe in the power of story to create change. I really think that that's a powerful lever that everyone has. Like, even if you're not a journalist, your story, telling it to one person at a barbecue or at a business event or a business meeting, that can change the course of someone's life. So that's why I became a journo. But then I was like, media's power is kind of declining, and actually tech at that point was, I mean, it was obviously big, but I was like, that's a real hockey stick of growth right there. Like, that's the capacity to make global change. That's really interesting. And so that's why I became kind of obsessed with figuring out how could you scale, teaching people how to negotiate, how to own their worth, know their worth, track their successes, advocate and negotiate for more pay and for more promotions. And it was funny, actually. I did a pitch once at this accelerator, and a guy who's quite well known in the Sydney tech scene, he's raised quite a lot of money. I was like doing this pitch about the gender pay gap and Pep Talker and the app, and we can help you, you know, negotiate, and we're going to do this, and we're going to teach you about knowing your worth and not getting screwed over on contracts. And he was like, I just don't understand the problem that you're solving. And I was like, oh, well, the problem's like half of the population is paid 20% less. He's like, just don't really see why that's a problem. And I was like, oh, this is why it's a problem, because of people like you. So that was kind of just enraged me even further.
So let me guess, he didn't put any money in, but you did go on, despite him, to turn Pep Talker into an app. As you said, it was a deliberate choice to go, let's go with tech. I really want to understand how the app works, because you've really drawn on some clever technology things to make this work.
So we're bootstrapped. So I've never raised capital because of experiences, I suppose, of honestly misogyny and sexism that I experienced with my few interactions that I had with people in the venture and investing world. And I was like, I just don't need any more of this energy. I'm just going to figure out how to make this a business so we can self-fund. So I actually had a media training business, and I kind of had that on the side, made money from that, and then would just plow that back into building the app and figuring it out. So the way the Pep Talker app works is, it's totally free. You know, our core value is impact, and we want to influence as many people for better. So it's intentionally a free app. You can tip in the app if you want. Most people don't. They just use it for free, and that's great. And it basically prompts you. So it'll be like, Kellie, what's up? What are you really proud of this week? And you'll be like, oh, I recorded this podcast. Or, you know, we have teachers who use the app who track the success of students who couldn't read, who can now read. We have people in sales who use the app to say, you know, I closed a $50,000 deal. I signed an ASX 200 client. They keep track of all these successes, because I don't know about you, Kellie, but like, honestly, I couldn't tell you what I had for dinner last Thursday, let alone the week before, let alone in March or December. Like, I don't know. Like, it's just, I don't remember. And the problem is when you go to a performance review and you don't remember, there's not a lot of meat on the bone. Like, how are you going to get a raise or a promotion if you don't have data and if you don't have statistics? And so the premise of the app really is to firstly help you track those successes so that you have quantifiable statistics to take into those meetings. But secondly, we worked with a behavioral psychologist. The theory behind it from a psychology perspective is this idea of the nudge. So it says that if you want to run a marathon, you can't just wake up one day and run a marathon. That's going to be very challenging. But you could wake up one day and run 100 meters. And the next day you could run 110 meters. And maybe in a week you can run 200 meters, and like so on and so on and so on. So it's like this idea of incremental change creates large shifts. And the change we want to make through the app is reminding yourself of your own value. Because, you know, we're fed a lot of negative messages in the press, sometimes from toxic work environments, bosses, maybe from trauma we've had through family or friends in the past that we carry with us. And so we have to rewire our brains to focus on the successes you have had, right? And the positive impact you did make. Did you mentor an intern? Did you organize a holiday party? Whatever it is, keeping a track of that helps us focus our mindset on those positives, right? Rather than spiraling down, oh my gosh, I didn't sign that client. I made that spelling mistake on the email. You just kind of spiral and you forget about the 8 awesome things that you did. So we're trying to shift people's mindsets so that by the time they get to performance review time or applying for a new job, they have more self-confidence to frame those conversations from a place of power rather than a place of kind of fear and freaking out. If you want an average result, that's fine. But if you want an extraordinary raise or an extraordinary result, or if you really want to move the needle on what your step is next in your career, you've got to put in the work.
This is Curveball. Meggie Palmer is my guest. She runs an app called Pep Talker, a very renowned speaker across the globe, a fantastic career in journalism. I'm going to get Meggie to give us some tips on negotiating in just a moment. I'm Kellie Riordan and this is Curveball, and Meggie Palmer runs Pep Talker, an app and a business that advocates for equal pay. Meggie went to university in Brisbane, Australia, but she's now living in New York, where Pep Talker has scaled to become one of the leading voices on the gender pay gap issue globally. She's headlined the prestigious Vogue Codes conference at South by Southwest. She lectures at Columbia University. What was that move to New York like for you? I can understand why you're there. You're sort of in the heart of technology, but it must also be a lonely city. What was it like moving to New York?
I've not found it lonely, fortunately. I mean, I think I'm lucky I moved here with my partner. So I guess that made it easier. It was less lonely than when I moved to London. But I think, you know, you make community wherever you are, right? And I guess the Aussie in New York contingent is pretty strong. So I sort of hit the ground running there. And I found the poverty challenging when I arrived, honestly, the discrepancy, like the haves and the have-nots, the gap in New York is quite extraordinary. So I found that very confronting. I reckon I was probably a bit depressed the first month because I was just like, I can't get over this city where there's like, you know, $100 million apartments. And then there's people who, you know, can't take their kids to the doctor because the healthcare is so bad, or they're living rough and it snows. And I found that quite challenging. And then I guess the sad thing is, I guess you sort of get used to it. That's probably the sad reality. You know, I try and carry some cash now to give to people. But yeah, it's just there's a big gap in New York in particular, but also across America. I think that the poverty is more stark here because of the healthcare issues. So that was kind of something to get your head around as an Australian, right, where we've got great healthcare.
And then there's COVID, and you actually contracted COVID in New York.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had COVID very early on. So that wasn't ideal. It wasn't as bad as other people had it, fortunately. So that's something that's a positive. Fortunately, touch wood, have had no long COVID impacts. Fully vaccinated now, delighted to be fully vaccinated and excited to see the vaccination rates rising globally.
It must have been challenging for you though, because as well as being ill, you're trying to have the best year that Pep Talk has ever had. You know, 2020 was meant to be the year where you guys smashed it. So how did you respond?
I don't know. I think it's also like, you know, I run a business. My team is all remote. I work remote. You know, when I'm allowed into Australia, I typically am home once or twice a year and I can still keep working. I really just need a laptop, a webcam, and away we go. We've always run everything remotely. We used to do a little bit more in person, but now 100% of our work is remote. So I honestly felt quite blessed that I could keep a job and I could figure it out to keep income coming in to support myself and my team when I knew that there's so many people that couldn't do that. So I think in perspective, like, sure, we didn't hit our goal last year, but also we're still in business. I'm healthy. My team's healthy. Like, I just really think it was about perspective, honestly. And, you know, one of our criteria for hiring is glass half full. Because in a startup, you know, as you would know, it's like you've got to figure it out and you've just got to problem solve. And so I said to my team when things got really bad, in terms of you could see the world was slowly shutting down and it was going to be going on like that for a while. I said to them, I was like, okay, just take 48 hours, eat chocolate, watch Netflix, do what you got to do, and then we'll just figure it out. And we did. We took a few days off and then we came back and we were like, okay, how can we keep serving the community? At this point, I think we had 50 or 60,000 people in the Pep Talk community, and we were just like, we have to keep giving back. Other people have it much worse. We have to support people. We started doing these daily Instagram lives just when everyone started doing them, but just to try and just because people were looking for community and connection because it was so hard for so many people at that time. So I think we just had to approach it from a place of service and like, you know, giving back, because otherwise I guess you would have just spiraled, and I didn't think that was going to be healthy either.
One of the goals you had, though, at the beginning of 2020 was to meet Sarah Blakely, who's the founder of Spanx. And she's kind of a pin-up girl.
I always forget about that, yeah.
Girl made good. Did you meet her? What happened?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Sarah Blakely is this founder of Spanx, which is a very famous female underwear, shapewear brand. She's now pivoted into activewear and all sorts of things. So she's a self-made billionaire here in the United States. Yeah, it was just like a flippant thing. I said to the team and one of my friends, I was like, I just have a real sense that I'm going to meet her this year. Like, that's going to be awesome. I wonder what that impact that will have. I wonder how it will happen. I thought it'd be a conference or like, I don't know, TED Women or something like that. And then COVID, and I was like, okay, well, the revenue goals go out the window. Those lofty goals go out the window. And it was so interesting. We have a big partnership with Salesforce, which is a technology company. And they emailed me maybe 2 months into COVID, I don't know, like April, May last year. And they're like, okay, so we're doing this virtual event and we were wondering if you could be involved. I was like, oh, okay, what's the deal? And they're like, so it would be you and someone from our team and Sarah Blakely. And I was like, what? And they're like,
yeah,
Sarah
Blakely.
Yeah. And they're like, yeah, would you be down to like be involved? Would you, like, we know it's a lot of time, but like, and I was like, are you serious? Yes. Like, where do I sign? Obviously I'm in, like 100%. So that was really fun. And it came about also because Sarah, during COVID, she has a charity, a foundation called the Red Backpack Fund, and she supports female entrepreneurs. And so she actually gave Pep Talker a grant, which was amazing. So we were one of 50 businesses, I think, that got this grant from her, which really helped us kind of bridge that gap, keep us solvent, honestly, because it was kind of touch and go there for a while. And it's funny, just like those it was like a small gesture from her probably, but for us, that was obviously like literally miraculous kind of thing. So it's kind of one of those pinch me moments. That was a pinch me moment. Then for Salesforce to say, could you be involved? I was like, what is going on? This is so weird in a good way.
I want to talk for a moment about self-belief and self-doubt, because you've just described the roller coaster. You know, my business could fall in a heap and I'm going to have to eat chocolate and work out if I can do this, through to I'm meeting my like business hero, right? Mm-hmm. And it's such, you know, I know at Dead Set Studios, it's exactly the same. The highs are so high, the lows are so low, and you're just on that roller coaster all the time. You own multiple businesses. You've got this glowing journalism resume. You know, do you have those moments of self-doubt, or is that what Pep Talker is all about? It's just, I won't listen to that voice. I actively switch it off and I tell myself a different story.
Listen, it's very much what we're about, right? Is helping people know and truly know and own and value their worth. But that's not to say that I don't have an experience imposter syndrome all the time. 100% I do. It's so annoying. I wish I didn't. But I'm like 70% of the population who admit that they experience imposter syndrome from time to time, right? And so for those of you who aren't familiar with it, imposter syndrome is this phenomenon that is that sense where you feel like you're a fraud, or you feel like you'll be found out, or you kind of don't belong, even though you're doing the work and you're getting good feedback. So it's that feeling that you never kind of feel like you belong or should be in the role that you're in, or you kind of think it was a mistake that you got that promotion, even though you've clearly got the runs on the board to deserve it. So yeah, of course, I go through that more than I would like. And I have a coach who actually, she defines it to me. Sometimes she says you're either foffing or you're fossing. And she explains it as foffing is fear of failure and fossing is fear of success. And so she's kind of given me that language, which has been helpful to acknowledge when those feelings come up, to say, oh, am I experiencing a fear of failure here or a fear of success? And do I need to kind of put that to one side? And one of the frameworks we talk about a lot at Pep Talk Her is overcoming imposter syndrome is kind of like an art, like ART. So you have to acknowledge that that's what's happening. You have to acknowledge those feelings when they come up. You have to replace them with something more positive and helpful. And going forward, you have to track your successes so that it's easier to replace those negative thoughts. So it's about acknowledging the thoughts, replacing those thoughts, and tracking the positives going forward so that you have a dossier of achievements and successes to draw on when you feel yourself spiraling into those negative moments.
So give us some of those negotiating techniques, because, you know, I'm now trying to get some fundraising happening for Dead Set Studios, and I'm now talking to investors, and I have to get out there and show my worth and negotiate for myself. And it's a different situation to when you're negotiating a pay rise and you're already in the company. It's like, imagine the people who have to negotiate their pay in the first place when they enter a company, or negotiate and advocate for themselves in order to do a really good deal.
Yeah.
What are your tips?
Well, you know, this is the most important thing for any negotiation is preparation. And it's so boring because it's not like a magic bullet, but it's so true, right? So if you're negotiating with your child to go to bed, probably you don't need to prepare that much, right? You probably got that. But if you're preparing or to negotiate a big pay raise, a big new job, if you're preparing to raise capital for a business, that's significant, right? Like you're asking a lot of someone else. So there's a lot of mental gymnastics that you have to do before you even walk into that room. And when I think about preparation, you've got to know your numbers, of course, but you've got to know the people too. And so, you know, I think the first thing is to demystify that negotiations are hostile, or that they're a fight, or that they're combative, right? When you look at the definition of negotiation, it's actually just two or more parties coming together to reach an agreement. That's all it is. So I always say to people, don't freak out. You're not having a fight with your boss. You're not going in there like a Billions style, like rah, 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 this is what I want. You're just like, hey, this is what I need. You need this. Like, where can we kind of meet at a place that feels good for both of us? Because I think what can happen in negotiations, when you think of it as transactional, you can play a short-term game, right? And you might get what you want now, but in the long term, that can sometimes be damaging. So one of our facilitators, he talks about negotiation, walking into it as you would a marriage. Like approach it as though you're going to have a long-term relationship. Again, if you're negotiating with a market store owner in a city you're never going to go to again, the long-term relationship doesn't really matter. But when you're negotiating with a prospective boss or a prospective investor or board member, hopefully they'll be with you for the long term. So you sort of have to approach it with the end in mind, you know, and also thinking, when you think about people who you're negotiating with, if you think of them kind of like an iceberg, there's a heap of stuff you can know above the surface, above the water, but like what's going on below the water as well. So if you're negotiating to raise capital, you'd be wanting to talk to other people who've raised funds from that person. And they might be like, oh my gosh, they're so into social impact. If you talk about social impact, they'll sign straight away. Or they might say they don't invest in technology, so don't even bother. Or they don't invest in media, so don't waste your time. But, you know, the other important thing with any negotiation is to know your numbers. And I always like to go in with 3 scenarios, and they are wish, want, and walk. right? So your wish scenario is like, oh my gosh, fall off the chair. That's amazing. I can't believe that's just like perfect outcome. I love it. Your walk scenario is actually for those terms, I'm not willing to accept that, or actually that number and those conditions don't work for me. I'm not even going to entertain that offer. So that's your walk figure. And then your want figure is potentially somewhere in between. It's a figure or an outcome where you're like, do you know what? I'm actually quite delighted with that. I think that's fair and reasonable for both of us. I don't feel like I'm screwing them over. I feel like I'm really fairly compensated. I'm quite happy to jump out of bed and do this work. So that's kind of like a great outcome that you're looking for too.
I feel like there is so much good information in what you just said there, and I am having to practice so much of this right now. I'm right in the middle of some heavy-duty negotiating, and, you know, I do know my numbers and I do feel prepared, but just things like treat it like a marriage is such good advice, because I think sometimes too, as women, because now we're so fearful of getting kind of walloped or not getting a fair deal or it not being equal, I have found myself almost getting a little bit defensive in kind of like, no, you must give me this, and kind of playing hardball almost to overcompensate. And it's about reframing that just a little to go, look, no, this is my reason why I think this is good, but to do it in a way that keeps the relationship intact and, you know, acknowledges that we do need to get on the same page here, and what's important for me and what's important for you, and how can we meet on that. So good.
Well, and I think the other thing that you've just raised there, Kellie, is, you know, the other thing we talk about, we have most of our resources are free. We also have a paid course, right, for people who want to really get a promotion or a raise. And one of the things we talk to in the Career Level Up specifically is around planning for roadblocks. So similar to putting yourself in your boss's shoes, you have to put yourself in the other person's shoes. So you kind of know what they're going to want. You pretty much know. They're either going to say yes, no, or maybe. Right? And if they say maybe, what are their conditions? You can pretty much brainstorm and figure out 80% of what they'll ask for. There's always going to be curveballs. It's never perfect information. But the more preparation you do, the more perfect your information is going in, right? So planning for roadblocks is like, okay, if they say no to my wish figure, what other things could I throw in there? So one thing that's really easy to do is to say, okay, listen, honestly, that's below my expectations. Something I really value is annual leave. I'd be willing to accept that number if you'd be open to adding on an extra 10 days annual leave for me. So it doesn't really cost the business anything to give you more annual leave. Yes, you're still being paid. You know, you might say, I'm happy to still check emails once a day on those 10 days, or I won't do it when there's big projects. There's ways that you can sort of get other non-monetary benefits as well.
I think that is such good advice, and it is what I ended up doing with my former employer when I kind of was downgraded, and I thought, well, how can I just claw something back that makes me feel like I got something out of this? And again, at that time in my life, it was the extra 2 weeks leave.
Right.
So it's so great.
And how good's that? Like, that's not nothing.
It meant that mentally I could move on from like, I was really screwed over here to, oh, okay, it's not perfect, but it's something.
It is something. And again, I think, you know, the responsibility is on you to steer your own ship in terms of your salary negotiations. Get creative. Like sometimes you'll get a signing bonus. Sometimes you'll be like, okay, that base is not where I want it to be. I'll accept that base salary. But if I do this, this, and this, or if I achieve X, Y, Z KPIs, can you consider a bonus? There's lots of different things. Sometimes people want to go to Harvard and do a short course, or they want to go to UNSW and do an MBA. Businesses will sometimes cover half of that or all of it if you're lucky, right? So, but you've kind of got to have some of those ideas in your back pocket ready to go. And I always say to people, to your point, if you're worried that you might get defensive, or if you're thinking a lot about it, you're finding it a bit stressful, practice beforehand. So I used to do practices with my dad, and I'd be like, be as harsh as you can, like try and make me cry. Like ask me all the hard questions, like say no, like really. And because that way, it was like my brain was practicing, and if I did cry or if I stuffed it up, who cares? It's just my dad practicing with me. And that way you walk into the actual negotiation so much more resilient, so much more confident, because you've had time to prepare. How am I going to navigate this? If they say this, here's some prepared lines. Practicing the power of silence is super valuable. A lot of us will start to negotiate with ourselves. You know, I've done that before. I've seen a lot of my clients do that. they'll ask for a figure and then they'll say, but, I'm happy to work on the weekends and la, 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 la.
Yep, we all do that.
Hang on.
Mm-hmm.
Say nothing. See what they say.
So what's next for Pep Talker, for the app, for you as an individual? Like, where is this headed? Because you've achieved so much already in such a short space of time.
Oh, look, there's lots more to do. Like, my goal is to be unemployed, Kelly. So if we can close that gender pay gap, I'll have nothing to do and I'll just like go and have a beer somewhere.
Yeah, I hope my daughters don't need to use you and my granddaughters. Yeah, I want you out of business as well.
Me too. I think the stats are different, right, depending on how you crunch the numbers, but we're probably looking at 100 to 200 years, sadly, from getting to parity. But, legislation is starting to change. Some businesses that we work with, Fortune 500, ASX 200 companies, are making some really bold moves in terms of quotas and goals that they have for equality and leadership, pay, which all goes to help closing the gap. So I'm really positive about that. Sadly, I'll probably have a job for a little bit longer, but, our goal is to impact 1 million women, right, over the next 5 years. So we've got a lot of work to do. So through the app, through our free career programs, and through the work that we do in-house with corporate enterprises as well. It's fun, but got to stay positive and keep your eye on the goal that we're working towards.
Well, congratulations on taking a curveball moment, a crucible moment for you, which was so terrible at the time, and turning it into this absolute juggernaut that is not just changing your life, but so many others. I'm so pleased to speak to you on Curveball.
Oh, thanks so much, Kelly. Really appreciate your time.
Hey, thanks for listening, and I hope you're enjoying Curveball. So many good guests. It certainly keeps me inspired, and I hope it's doing that for you as well. Make sure you follow us in your podcast app, and that way you'll get notified whenever we post a new episode. And look, you definitely want to listen to our next episode where I talk to Olivia Humphrey from Canopy.
And I remember all the adrenaline going through my body, and I wrote to the head of the private equity firm and I said, can we have a chat? It's pretty clear that I don't have an employment contract, and in my mind, that means you don't want me. So we can do this one of two ways. We can move forward and have this probably quite unpleasant parting, or we can talk about it now and I can be onboarded with this process and I can help you find a new CEO that you think you're going to need to take the business where you want it to go.
Olivia Humphrey's story is incredible. She's so inspiring. It's one of the best interviews I think I've done on Curveball yet. She takes Canopy from her spare bedroom in Perth and scales it into this worldwide streaming platform in the age of Netflix and Stan and Binge, so you don't want to miss this episode. Curveball's a production of Dead Set Studios. We're a global podcast consultancy and production house. The executive producers on this episode are Rachel Fountain and myself, and our producer is Liam Riordan.